Hi, this is Sherry from the Educator Networks team at America Achieves. We've hosted Educator Voice Fellowships for the last 5 years or so with the purpose of supporting teachers and principals as champions and advocates for issues they care about. Today, in this media savvy video, we're going to talk about one specific educator voice strategy: opinion writing. Like writing an op-ed or article for a newspaper or online publication or a blog post. This and other educator voice resources are available on our website, www.americaachievesednetworks.org, on the More Resources page. First, a bit about us. Our mission at America Achieves is to help people from every background access educational pathways, resulting in rewarding careers and economic mobility. Did you know that 7 million jobs in the U.S. are currently unfilled, including in the high opportunity industries of IT, advanced manufacturing, and healthcare? Also, demand for workers in leading industries exceeds available supply by millions of openings. But what it takes to be meaningfully employed, to contribute to one's community and access rewarding, upwardly mobile jobs, is rapidly changing. Advances in technology and globalization are leading to new jobs, ways of working, and employer demands, not only for improved academic and technical skills, but also cross-sector competencies like communication, collaboration, and critical thinking. Many of these fast-growing, high-opportunity careers and the paths to them remain a mystery to students, families, and even teachers. Which is why, as you learn more about the changing 21st century workplace, and as you adapt your teaching practice to better prepare students for the future, we encourage you to share your learnings and your stories. I'll start by saying loudly and clearly, your story matters. Voices from our schools and classrooms need to be heard. Demand for educator voice is increasing, and it's so important that great educators are able to advocate for what's best for students. So the first thing to think about is what you want to say. What story from your classroom do you want to tell? What message do you want to get across? After you have an idea, consider these three big questions. What's the news? What's the big idea that you want to write about? Topics can be one-time current events, like how you and your students collaborated with a local business on a recent project. Or they can be seasonal or recurring, like back to school in September and graduation in the spring. Why does it matter? What is your story? How are you connecting your story and experience to the big picture and the news? This can be relatively easy if you want to write about graduation rates, or if in fact students are graduating college and career ready in the springtime, but it can be more tricky if you want to write about the exciting job shadow your students recently participated in, or the cross-curricular project-based learning efforts at your school. This question also gets at the importance of providing evidence, if you can, research, and interesting or shocking data, as well as personal stories. And who cares? It's important to know and invest in your audience, which we'll talk a bit more about in a minute. Who will be affected by your message? What is the emotional pull? How can you pull on the reader's head strings and heart strings? The who cares is connected to the why does it matter and takes it to the next level, especially if you can include a personal story. Step 1 is to determine the big three and ask yourself these questions. After you have an idea of what you want to say and why it matters, you'll choose what type of article to write and your desired audience. First, let's do some level setting on the different forms opinion writing can take. First, we have an op-ed, which stands for opposite the editorial page and is a bit more formal. Second, there's a blog post or newsletter article, which are more casual and informal. And third, a letter to the editor, which is usually a response to a recent article and is brief and persuasive. An op-ed, blog post, and newsletter article are all roughly 600 words, but do vary depending on publication. A letter to the editor is about 250 words. Of course, you have to stick to the word count guidelines of the venue you're hoping to pitch to. You'll see that examples of each of these are linked in the opinion writing one-pager, and that step 2 is to choose what you will write and what venues you will pitch to. Though you won't actually get in touch with the publication until you have your final draft ready for them, it's important to have some idea of where you want your writing to be published before you begin drafting so that you can write with your audience in mind. If you haven't already, get to know the media venue, its topic, coverage, and slants, and make sure what you write is a good match for their publication. You'll want to check the submission and word count guidelines of the venues too. And this is pretty easy. I'll show you. If I do a quick Google search for Denver Post-Op-Ed submission guidelines and click on the first thing that comes up, here you'll see that letters to the editor should be 250 words and sent to openforum@denverpost.com. And guest commentary, that's an op-ed, should be 650 words and sent to columns@denverpost.com. They also say that you should send a high-resolution photo of the author and a short bio. They also say that they favor columns on public policy, social issues, and current news, and they give preference to local and regional writers and issues. When considering venues, you should think about your main message, who it is intended for, and what matters most to them. You should also have a little reality check. The higher the media visibility, the harder it is to get in. If you shoot for the moon and pitch to the New York Times, with a timely piece, you may miss the opportunity to get it picked up by your local paper. I'll also say here that connections can help. If you know an editor or a reporter at a certain publication, leverage those relationships. But of course, a well-written piece and credibility are most important. Before we move to step 3, take a quick look at an example article linked on the Opinion Writing Overview. America Achieves Fellow and Maryland educator Christina Duncan Evans wrote this 789-word blog post for Education Week. The article is about 3 specific projects she did in her classroom and the importance of engaging authentic audiences. If we think about the first few steps, the big 3 and picking a venue, the news she's sharing is what she has learned in her classroom about engaging authentic audiences, and her desired audience for the article, the people who would care about this, was other educators, which is why she chose Education Week, a publication with a readership of educators, rather than her local newspaper, for example, for this article. Step 3 is to write your draft. After you have your answers to the big 3 and you have your desired audience and venue in mind, you'll start to draft your article. When writing, make sure you identify what your message is and that it comes across. Try to connect it to a trending topic or event if you can, and consider your audience. What would resonate with them? What language do you need to use to prevent confusion? Avoid jargon. Educators have a lot of teachery lingo, PLC, KWL. Even standards can be confusing. It's important to use layman terms or define an education term if you do use it. As you write, keep in mind these 7 helpful hints. Number 1, be solutions-oriented. Venting and complaining is not compelling. 2, establish your credibility. Say something like, As a high school math teacher with 14 years of experience, yada, yada, yada. With that, remember to be authentic and speak to what you know. So if you are a high school math teacher, you probably shouldn't be writing about best practices for teaching young children how to read. 3, know your audience and what matters to them. 4, acknowledge concerns and build a bridge. Can you find any common ground before offering a different opinion? 5, take the high road. Don't get personal or take things personally, and ignore bad behavior if others take a low blow. These 2, 4, and 5 are especially true if you're writing a letter to the editor in response or even a rebuttal to another article or responding to comments on your or another author's article. 6, bring the good news. Your article doesn't have to be controversial. Consider sharing a great story from your classroom. And 7, know both sides of a current conversation. This ties into number 4 too. It'll help you sound credible if you are aware of and acknowledge concerns about or pushback to your argument. With these in mind, take a look at another example op-ed linked on the Opinion Writing Overview. America Achieves fellow and Massachusetts educator Erin Dukeshire wrote this 722-word op-ed for Education Post. The article is in response to another op-ed that was written by a principal from New York who was skeptical of Common Core, and in Erin's article, she defends the standards. You'll see that Erin leverages several of the 7 helpful hints. She establishes her credibility. As a 10-year veteran teacher, she says, she acknowledges the principal's concerns and tries to find common ground. I agree that we should avoid a federally mandated curriculum, she goes on. She takes the high road. Even though she is disagreeing with the principal's perspective, she right away refers to the principal as an accomplished principal, and the entire piece, including the conclusion, is focused on students, and I think everyone can agree that students should be at the center of all that we do. And she definitely brings the good news. Really, the whole article is about why she likes the standards, and she uses examples to support her opinion. I'm sure Erin wrote this article. As she wrote it, it went through several drafts before she pitched it to Education Post. It's always important to get a second and sometimes even a third or fourth pair of eyes on your draft. As the author, you'll have to be somewhat vulnerable and open to feedback. It's always interesting to hear how others perceive our messages and intent, and specific feedback can be really helpful. That said, don't be afraid if you receive feedback that looks like this. This is an actual op-ed that I wrote this month. I sent it to our communications manager to get her feedback, and this is how it came back to me. Be prepared for this. Sometimes it doesn't feel great to get something you've written back with a bunch of red pen on it, but not only can a friend or colleague provide feedback, oftentimes the publication will too, so there may be several rounds of edits. It's normal to feel a bit of frustration or protectiveness over your writing at first, but again, if you're vulnerable and open to incorporating the feedback, it'll oftentimes make your writing much stronger. I'll also say that suggestions are simply suggestions, things for the author to consider, but ultimately it's up to you whether or not to accept them and what changes you want to make. You may be asked to provide feedback on someone else's writing too, and if you do, try to make it as specific and constructive as possible. Here are some prompts to help you provide the feedback. Consider adding evidence or research to support your claim that. Are you familiar with? Give them a resource to push the author's thinking on a certain issue. I was lost or confused when you were discussing. This part could be made stronger by. After you've incorporated the feedback you've received and you're happy with what you've got, you'll be ready to submit your article to the editor, and you have to know who you are sending your draft to. Step 4 is to pitch it. And I'll say here that if you work in a school or school district, it's of course important to follow your district's policies. You may want to double check with the communications department or public relations office if they have any sort of guidelines or would want to sign off on an article before you pitch it. And if you're sharing stories from your classroom, definitely respect your students' privacy. Don't write anything any identifying information, and also use a pseudonym for a student name. As a reminder, like we saw earlier, you can usually find the editor's email address on the venue's website. When you pitch, keep your message short and compelling. Explain why your article should be published now, why people care, and why you're the best person to write about it. Include the article in the body of the email, along with a brief 3-line bio. Be ready to share your headshot and art for the article, a classroom picture, for example, if possible, and if it's requested. There's a rule of thumb in the industry that you can only submit to one publication at a time, so be sure to abide by that. Almost no major outlets will consider a piece that is being submitted elsewhere. It's definitely okay to give the editor a deadline in your email by saying something like, "Given the relevance of this article to today's news, I would appreciate if you were able to let me know a yes or no so that I have the chance to explore other publishing options this week. Can you let me know by Tuesday?" If the editor gets back to you, respond ASAP. Timing is everything. If your piece is published, send a thank you message to the editor and share your work with your networks by sending an email to your friends and colleagues and posting on social media. After you pitch, be persistent. If you haven't received a response, wait about 4 or 5 business days, or fewer if it's a timely piece, and then follow up. Reply in the same email thread. If your first choice doesn't respond or is not interested, don't be discouraged. This happens all the time, and editors frequently have a backlog of pieces to publish. Consider editing the article to strengthen it and give the first publication a heads up that you're submitting it elsewhere, and then try again. Your article will eventually get published, whether it's at your first choice venue or your 4th or 5th. And if it's published online, which most articles are these days, there may be a comment section at the bottom of the article. This is one reason why it's great to share your article with your network. Your friends and colleagues can chime in with supportive comments. You can also leverage the comment section on other articles as a quick way to interject your voice. A few tips. As always, speak only from your experience. Scrub your writing for typos. We see a ton of errors in the comment section because people are working quickly. And again, as always, take the high road. There can be some mean people or trolls online, but don't let them get to you. After you become more comfortable writing articles, I'll encourage you to build relationships with editors and education reporters in your community. These relationships can be very, very valuable if you're interested in sharing your voice. The first step is to read their work, know their recent coverage, and know the section they edit or report on. Then reach out. You can send an occasional, quick, friendly note. "Hey, great coverage of the new pre-K legislation. I'm a teacher and I really appreciate your work." You can offer to help. "I'm a principal working on engaging local business and industry in our community, in our school, and happy to be a resource to you." And of course, be polite. Send thank you notes after a meeting, coverage, or publication. Before I sign off, I want to reassure you that if you're new to this and you're feeling intimidated or nervous, that's totally normal. Reach out to folks in your network, or maybe a mentor or someone you look up to for support, and give them a heads up that you may solicit their feedback on your writing. And I'll just remind you of where we started. You've got this. Your voice is important. Your story matters. And educators like you should advocate for what's best for kids. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please reach out to us by emailing educatornetworks@americaachieves.org. And to learn more about the America Achieves Educator Networks or find other resources, visit our website at www.americaachievesednetworks.org.